The doorbell blasted at 4:50 a.m., shrill and non-stop. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. I stumbled to the door, half awake, only to find a cop, a guy with a clipboard, and Denise Crowley, president of the HOA, standing there like they were on a mission. Without even a hello, Denise pointed at me and screamed,
"You know what you did!
You're illegally occupying this
You know
property.
what you did!
Your lease expired last night.
What are you
We're
talking
here to evict
about?
you." I stared, barely
This is my
processing
property
her
deed
words,
right here.
then said, "I own this house." She froze. The cop took a long look at the paperwork she handed him, and that's when I realized this was just the beginning, and I had the receipts to make her regret it. Denise Crowley had a way of making her presence known. Short blonde bob, athleisure that screamed, "I'm in charge," and a clipboard always within arm's reach. She was the self-appointed queen of Maple Crest Reserve. The first time we met, she handed me a glossy packet of rules and smiled like she'd just handed me the key to a perfect life. "If you ever have any questions about the rules, you come to me," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. At first, I didn't mind. I just wanted to live my quiet life. But Denise? She didn't do quiet. She was everywhere, checking up on lawns, sending emails about tiny violations, and standing in the middle of the street, clipboard in hand, when a moving truck would show up at a neighbor's house. It wasn't just about the rules anymore. It was about control. And when I didn't bite back at her little comments or obey every unspoken order, she got personal. She seemed to believe it was her duty to manage not just the neighborhood, but everyone in it. I was just another person to be scrutinized. And when the rental houses started filling up, she started treating me like a suspect too. She saw me as a problem. And when she labeled me as a renter, the real trouble began. For Denise, it wasn't about the rules. It was about power. And the more I ignored her, the more she wanted to take it. 3 years ago, I made the decision to buy a home. I wasn't looking for a mansion or a fixer-upper, just a quiet place to settle into. Maple Crest Reserve, a suburban development outside Columbus, seemed perfect. The houses were nice, the price was right, and the community was described as peaceful. One of those places where everyone cared about the neighborhood, had pride in their homes, and made sure the lawns were always freshly mowed. The HOA fees supposedly covered a pool and a gym, though the playground could have used a few more swings. Still, it seemed like a good deal for a quiet guy like me who worked from home and had no interest in drama. So I signed the papers, got my keys, and moved in. The first few months were peaceful. I'd work in my home office, make a pot of coffee, water the plants that I may or may not have overwatered, and enjoy the silence. The neighborhood was quiet. Everyone kept to themselves, just like I liked it. Then, one day, Denise Crowley showed up at my door. She was friendly enough, introducing herself as the HOA president and telling me if I had any questions about the rules, she'd be the person to talk to. She handed me a glossy packet of documents that looked like they were written in a legalese language designed to make your brain hurt. Inside, there were rules, expectations, and a long list of things I could and could not do. Most of it seemed like common sense. Don't park broken-down cars on your lawn, no goats, no illegal activities. Basic stuff. At first I didn't mind. I'd obey the rules and go about my life. But over time I realized that following the rules didn't matter. It was about how you followed them and how you interacted with Denise. That's when the cracks started to show. She seemed to take every small detail personally. The first violation letter I received wasn't for anything major, just a stray recycling bin visible from the street for a few extra minutes. But it was the start of something bigger. The real shift came when Denise started turning her attention to the rental homes popping up around the neighborhood. And when a property management company made a mistake and labeled my house as a rental, that's when things really went south. It started small. One morning I opened my inbox to find a polite but stern email from the HOA. Lease renewal reminder for tenant at 218 Grove Willow. I thought it was a mistake. I wasn't a tenant. I owned this house. So, I replied, explaining that I was the owner, and asked them to correct their records. The next day, I received another email, this time about a cluttered porch. Apparently, a fern and 2 chairs weren't up to HOA standards. This was followed by a violation notice about my grill, which was perfectly fine, by the way, just a normal Weber, not some eyesore. Denise didn't stop there. Soon after, I got an email from her personally, informing me that as a tenant, I needed to submit my lease for approval before making any exterior modifications. That was the moment I knew something was off. I had already told her I owned the house and had attached my deed as proof. Still, Denise pushed back, as if my ownership meant nothing. It was starting to feel less like a mistake and more like a deliberate attempt to undermine me. One afternoon, I stepped outside to grab my coffee when I noticed Denise standing at the edge of my yard. She was too close, too involved in my personal space for comfort. She was taking pictures of my house. I walked over, coffee mug in hand, and asked, "Need something?" Her response was calm, but it felt like a thinly veiled excuse. "I'm just documenting the exterior conditions," she said, her smile rigid and practiced. She glanced at my Ring doorbell camera like it was an illegal weapon. "We've had some issues with renters at this address, just making sure everything's up to code." I told her again that I owned the house. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The thing about Denise was that she didn't listen, at least not to people like me. She was on a mission, and I was just another obstacle. That night I noticed her parked across the street watching my house. That's when I realized she wasn't just keeping tabs on the place. She was trying to make me feel watched, like I didn't belong. The violations kept piling up, but this time it wasn't just annoying, it was escalating. A few days after Denise's photo session, I received another notice. This one was about the mailbox, which, apparently, was too close to the sidewalk, according to HOA standards. I'd had enough. I sent a calm but firm email once again explaining that I owned the property. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. A week later, I went online to pay my regular HOA dues, only to find that my account had been reassigned. My payments were now being handled by a property management company in Arizona, Grove Willow Investments, LLC. I called the company immediately, and after a few minutes of confusion, the representative said they had me listed as a tenant with a lease expiring at the end of the month. That's when the full weight of what was happening hit me. Someone, likely Denise, had been deliberately altering the records. This wasn't a simple mistake. She was pushing an agenda. I could feel the control slipping away as my home was slowly being turned into something it wasn't. As I stood there on the phone, I saw Denise once more lurking across the street, watching me. I felt the tension rise. This was no longer a matter of minor violations. This was an attack on my right to live here, in my own home. At 4:50 a.m., my doorbell rang like a siren, rapid and relentless. I stumbled out of bed, rubbing my eyes, only to find a police officer, a clipboard carrying HOA rep, and none other than Denise Crowley, standing on my porch. The officer introduced himself as Officer Ramirez, looking tired and annoyed. Denise, on the other hand, was practically shaking with anger. "Mr. Hale," the officer said, "we've received a report about illegal occupancy at this address. Your lease expired last night, and the HOA is requesting we remove you." Confused and still half asleep, I blinked and replied, "I own this house." Denise immediately shoved a piece of paper into my hands, insisting that I was a renter and had to leave. I could feel her excitement over this false claim, but I wasn't backing down. Without missing a beat, I handed the officer my deed and closing papers. Officer Ramirez looked at the documents, then tapped away on his phone, scanning the county records. "According to this," he said slowly, looking at Denise, "this property is owned by Marcus Hale. No lease involved." Denise's face turned bright red. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth hit Denise hard. She stammered, trying to salvage the situation. "This must be a mistake. The system shows this as a rental. He's not supposed to be here." Her voice wavered, but she was still desperately clinging to her narrative. Ramirez looked at her with growing frustration. "You're misrepresenting the situation. This isn't a rental property. You've dragged me out here for something that's not even real. Your records are wrong." Denise's smug confidence began to crack, but she wasn't ready to give up. "But he's ignored all of our notices. He's refused to submit his lease," she insisted, her voice rising. I could feel the tension building, and it was clear this wasn't going to end with her getting her way. "I'm not just going to let her get away with this," I said firmly, looking at the officer. I want to file a report for harassment, false reporting, and trespassing. She's been on my property without permission, and now she's trying to evict me from my own home." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "I'll make sure you get the paperwork for that, Mr. Hale." Denise's face went pale as the full weight of her actions set in. Her grip on the situation was slipping, and there was no way she could talk her way out of this one. It was clear. This was only the beginning. It all came to a head at the HOA board meeting. The room was packed. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, murmuring in anticipation as I stood at the front, my laptop connected to the projector. Denise was already sitting at the front table, flanked by 2 board members who were trying to look like they had no idea what was going on. The air was thick with tension as the property manager cleared his throat and announced that they were here to discuss recent concerns about enforcement actions and record-keeping. I couldn't help but notice the skeptical glances directed at Denise. She looked almost too calm, her confident posture masking the nerves underneath. I stood up and began by saying, "I'd like to address the issue of illegal eviction notices and false claims made by the HOA president, Ms. Crowley." The murmurs in the room grew louder as I pulled up the first slide on the projector. County records showing me as the owner of 218 Grove Willow, not a tenant. Denise's face turned beet red as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but I wasn't done. The HOA's records were wrong, and when I tried to correct them, I was met with harassment, I said, clicking to the next slide. "Here's the letter that was taped to my door at 4:50 a.m., telling me to vacate." The crowd went silent, all eyes on Denise. I moved on to the next slide, which showed the 911 call Denise had made. I pressed play, and her voice filled the room. "This is Denise Crowley, HOA president. We have a tenant refusing to leave their property after their lease expired. They may become violent." The room went dead quiet as everyone processed what they'd just heard. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly taken aback by the severity of her actions. Denise sat there, stiff as a board, her eyes locked on the floor. I clicked to the next slide. It was a copy of the violation notices I'd received, each one marked tenant. "These emails and letters were sent to me repeatedly, even after I provided proof of ownership," I said. "They treated me like a renter in my own home." A few people murmured their agreement. I clicked through several more slides, emails, photos, and the false eviction notice Denise had issued. Each one showed how far she'd gone to try to make my life miserable. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was exposing a pattern of behavior that threatened the entire community. Denise finally broke her silence. "This is out of context," she snapped, her voice cracking. "I was only trying to protect the neighborhood." But the crowd wasn't buying it. The room went silent when the HOA's insurance rep spoke up. "If an HOA officer misrepresents their authority and abuses emergency services, that's a huge liability for the association." Denise's face drained of color as she realized the consequences. The insurance rep continued, "We weren't informed that Ms. Crowley's actions could be seen as an eviction. This could expose the HOA to serious legal repercussions." Desperate, Denise stood and tried to justify herself, shouting, "I was just trying to protect this community. We can't let it become a rental free-for-all." But the damage was done. Ron, the treasurer, stood up and said, "I move to remove Denise Crowley as president for misuse of authority." One by one, the board members voted in favor of her removal. Denise's face turned bright red as she yelled, "You can't do this!" knocking over a chair in frustration. But it didn't matter. The vote was final. With the door slamming behind her, I felt a rush of victory. But as I checked my phone, a new message from my lawyer popped up. "The city investigator just called. They're opening a file on the 911 misuse, and management wants to talk settlement." The day after the board meeting, the mood in the neighborhood shifted. People came up to me in the street, offering nods of approval or even shaking my hand. It was like the entire community had been holding its breath, and now they could finally exhale. The constant tension that Denise had instilled in the neighborhood was gone, and for the first time in months, it felt like the residents were free to just live again. I'd always been the quiet guy, the one who kept to himself, never looking for drama. But after what had happened, I realized how much I'd underestimated the power of standing up for yourself. The support from my neighbors was overwhelming. Many of them shared their own stories about Denise's overreach. She wasn't just targeting me. She'd been a thorn in everyone's side. Denise's departure had a ripple effect. Without her stranglehold on the HOA, people started speaking up at meetings. The once quiet neighborhood started to feel more like a community again. It was an emotional payoff I hadn't expected, but I was grateful. As for Denise, her downfall was just beginning. The city investigator opened a formal inquiry into her 911 call, and her misuse of emergency services earned her a $1,500 fine. But that wasn't all. The HOA's insurance, now fully aware of her actions, refused to cover her legal expenses. The settlement that came out of it was a small victory for me. Jordan, my lawyer, was quick to secure a civil claim for harassment and wrongful eviction. The settlement not only covered my legal fees, which ran about $4,000, but also included an additional $5,000 in damages for the emotional distress Denise had caused me. She would be personally responsible for paying the full amount. I heard through the grapevine that Denise didn't take kindly to the settlement. Word was she'd tried to appeal it, but the HOA insurance wouldn't even touch her case. They had no interest in supporting someone who had made such a mess of things. The real twist came when, within a month, a for sale sign appeared in front of Denise's house. It seemed like the perfect poetic justice. Not only had she lost her position as HOA president, but now she was being forced out of the very community she'd tried to control. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The final blow? Denise never came back to another HOA meeting. When her name came up in discussions, people just shook their heads. The board restructured, and for the first time, it felt like the HOA was there to serve the community, not dictate every detail of our lives. As for me, I was able to breathe again. I had fought back, and in doing so, I'd reclaimed my peace and my home. The neighborhood felt different, better. People were friendlier, more willing to look out for each other. And as for Denise, well, she learned the hard way that messing with the wrong person can lead to far more than you bargained for. I found my way back to my quiet, simple life, watered my plants, made my espresso, and, most importantly, enjoyed the peace I had fought so hard to keep. It was a victory not just for me, but for everyone in Maple Crest Reserve. And as I sat on my front porch, watching the sun set over the now peaceful street, I couldn't help but smile. The fight was over. I had won.